Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our interview with Intimacy Director and Intimacy Coordinator, Lizzy Talbot, brought to you by AMPLIFY Film Festival. And thank you for bearing with us for those of you who were waiting for our 7 o'clock start. So we're going to give people a few moments to find us again. And if you're joining us live, hello. And if you're watching the recording, where were you? Please, I'd like to know. Do let us know where you're watching from tonight and maybe what your background is as well. So are you a filmmaker, an actor? Are you someone who's just interested in the topic that we're discussing? Do let us know in the comments. So this interview is brought to you as part of AMPLIFY Film Festival, a partnership between Film Bath, Cambridge Film Festival, Cine City Brighton, and Cornwall Film Festival. 4 brilliant British film festivals distilled into one, blasting new cinema into your front room. AMPLIFY's online festival runs from November the 6th to the 22nd. So that's this Sunday, people, and is beaming feature film shorts and industry events directly to you wherever you are in the UK, or in this case, this event, the world. I also need to say a big thank you to the BFI and our National Lottery for being AMPLIFY's main funder this year. With that said, I'm Henry for AMPLIFY Film Festival, and if you haven't already, give this page a like and make a note to go check out our previous live interviews. Now, one thing before we start, just a reminder, if you have a question, please put it in the comments as we go through, and a big thank you for the team who are looking after those. If you haven't got a question but fancy tagging someone who's missing out in the interview, do put it there as well. And given the content of tonight's talk, please be aware we will be talking about everything from sexual scenes or scenes of violent nature, nudity, and many other things besides. So it is a pleasure for me to introduce my guest tonight, Lizzy Talbot, an intimacy director and coordinator for stage and screen, working internationally for the likes of HBO, Starz, and Netflix, which I've taken from her website, so I know it's true. Lizzy is also the founder and director of Intimacy for Stage and Screen. She is literally fresh off the set, people, so please give a really big like to Lizzy. Lizzy, thank you for joining me. Let's get rid of that. Hello.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm not sure if fresh is the word, but definitely straight off the set. That's certainly accurate.
I know, it's great, and I think, you know, we've got people watching now already. It's marvelous to see everyone tuning in. I always find at this moment in time my Facebook notifications go crazy as people get liking the video and say, oh, we're here. We've got people from Wales watching already. Anyway, thank you for joining us, and, you know, thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with a bit about you. How did you become an intimacy coordinator, director, working in film and theatre?
Yeah, for sure. So my journey sort of initially began when I was 18. I had to do a scene of intimacy, and it was quite low key. It was just it was a kiss, and it was sort of not directed particularly well, in terms that we were just told off to go down a corridor and make something happen. And I just remember standing in the corridor with this guy in front of me as we sort of very awkwardly tried to work out, you know, what a good kiss looked like. And, you know, like I said, it's pretty low on the trauma scale, but fairly awkward all the same. And I remember, I'm sure it looked absolutely terrible. And I remember coming away from that thinking, really, is there not some sort of something that we could have done to make that better? And I started to work in the fight world. So I taught with the British Academy of Stage and Screen Combat, and I sort of did a lot of fight directing. And it was really interesting to note that whenever we had scenes of, you know, for example, domestic violence, the violence, you know, we could always do and we could always fix it. It was the intimacy on the sort of domestic violence scenes that was always pretty questionable. And so when I started sort of researching it, you could see all of the like safety protocols that we had with fight, and, you know, all of the like techniques that were put in place to storytell this work, and yet we had nothing for intimacy. And I was in the States, I think in 2014, 2015, and I met Tonya Sina. If you don't know who she is, like, please Google her. She's absolutely fantastic. And she was also researching the same thing. And when we were looking at it, it was so fascinating to see that she had a methodology, and she was sort of all the way through hers, and I had just started mine, and it just made sense. And so we started working sort of at grassroots level in the UK. We were actually called Theatrical Intimacy for a while, working with like students and sort of like, I guess, amateur dramatic theatre companies. And yeah, just trying to get the word out that like we may have found something that could work for these scenes. And it just kind of grew and grew. And what's really fascinating is in the theatre world, it's sort of like grassroots up. And thanks to the amazing work by Alicia Rodis, who worked really well with HBO on The Deuce. And she became the world's first intimacy
That's a great show, really interesting.
Yeah. Well, she became the world's first intimacy coordinator, and it just sort of had a domino effect from there. And so my path went from intimacy direction into intimacy coordination pretty quickly.
Wow. I mean, it's a bit of quite the journey there, really, with it all. And so, obviously, we know you're an intimacy coordinator and intimacy director, and you work in theatre and film. What's the difference between the two?
So I will say that intimacy coordination certainly, well, has a lot more paperwork for a start, a lot more. I would say in the timing, I think for intimacy direction, you often get to delve quite deep, obviously into the character work, into the choreography. You have this sort of big build up, and then you leave them to it once they've got established, and once we've got the stage manager essentially sort of taking over and running the intimacy calls. Whereas with intimacy coordination, the build-up time is a little shorter. You have a little bit less time to work and to choreograph. And of course, once it's done, it's done. It's not repeated, night after night. And I would say that there's a lot more coordination on the obviously the intimacy coordination side of it, because you're going over so many different departments. You're going over stunts, you're going over VFX, you're going over sound effects, obviously costume, hair, and makeup. Whereas for intimacy direction, it tends to be a little narrower than that.
That was going to be my next question, actually, is how you work with other departments. So you can't...
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think it's incorrect to say that our profession is the only profession that has ever cared about actor safety. That's just flat out wrong. There have been so many people from so many departments who have stepped up and stepped out to protect actors, particularly in the film world. And so the difference with our job is that we sort of have like the bird's eye view of the intimacy for the TV series or film from beginning to end. And so we're sort of really looking at, pre-production work all the way through to the final cut, and then like post-closure exercises as well. And so obviously, there has been so much work done by us, in particular, hair and makeup and costume, to look after actors because they have such close relationships. And again, like our role isn't to step on their toes at all. It's to sort of alleviate any responsibility that they've had to do to protect actors, which they're not paid to do. So yeah, I would say that that's how we work with a few of the departments. And obviously, like if there's a scene of domestic violence, or something that would involve a stunt, we would liaise with the stunt department as well.
I think that's one thing we hear across all these interviews from everyone is the huge amount of collaboration that takes place to make anything possible, particularly for film, be it short form or long form. And it's always great to hear that everyone can work together to make the best product that's possible. Yeah,
definitely. It's been really encouraging to be welcomed onto the set, because like I said, it is a new role. It has the potential to step on a lot of toes. And it's been really lovely to be sort of welcomed into the team in that way.
Great. And a question we ask everybody, sort of whatever they're working on, is what makes a project sort of jump out to you? Do you get involved, you get sent a script and then you go, I'd like to work on this? Or you ever talk with the producer? How do we get you on board to a project?
Yeah, for sure. So oftentimes, like it is the producers or the production coordinators or production managers will get in touch with us and say, hey, we're interested in having an intimacy coordinator. Like here's our script. Are you interested? And so, like, we'll get to read the script, and then we'll often, like, have a discussion about, like how we work, what we can bring to the production, and things that we need from production too. And sort of that's really how it works, and it's always in pre-production stage. I never want to be called in the night before.
It's all about that planning that you want, and that's the thing.
Yeah.
Because as you said, you're coordinating something, and an action and a physicality is taking place where two or more people are possibly working together to make something that's quite a personal moment, really. Yeah,
absolutely. And so, like, we found that the more homework you can do beforehand, the better the scene. It's never a good idea for someone to find out what their boundaries are in the moment, because chances are they've already been crossed.
And what do you mean by boundaries there? What is that?
Yeah, so it might be anything from, like what they're willing to show in terms of nudity to what actions they're willing to do regarding any sort of simulation. Or any non-simulation, really, because non-simulation involves actual kissing and actual hands traveling all over bodies. So it's really sort of finding out with actors, what their comfort level is of work. Because again, as soon as they are comfortable and they're confident, they can really commit to the scene, and they can be thinking about their character and not about, oh, am I okay with this?
No, that makes sense. And again, if you're watching, you're an actor, and just maybe share any experiences you have, or have you been asked to do things, etc., in the comments, if you're willing to, or and just give us an idea of or things you've seen on film that you think, oh, actually that worked really well. Now, I need to ask this, Lizzy. Is there a downside to being an intimacy coordinator?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think sometimes when you, obviously we've met resistance for so many years now. We're kind of used to it. But I will say that can be pretty exhausting, and it can burn you out quite hard. I found, especially in the first couple of years, constantly justifying why this was important. Because again, like, for me, this certainly started pre-Me Too. So of course, a lot of the reactions from the industry was, like, hey, this is how it's always going to be, like the industry is never going to change, particularly if you're a female, like this is what you can expect in the industry. Especially when you're working with actors who potentially have trained at drama schools, and potentially, they may have had professors or instructors who are very much like, yes, and like you must always be open, you must always agree. If you don't, you can be labeled, and you could be labeled as difficult, or not a team player, or I heard someone say once, well, you should just go and be a pharmacist then, because this isn't for you. And it's like, no, actors can still have body autonomy, and they can still have boundaries. They're still human beings. And so I will say, like the first few years, it was certainly a tough time, and it was pretty exhausting work. So, and like, even though there is less of it now, I still do meet it. And so for me, like, again, like just justifying why actors should have boundaries and body autonomy can be pretty draining sometimes.
I guess there's quite a lot of mental health that comes into that as well, because not just for the actors, the cast, the crew, but you as well, having to deal with that on a set on a daily basis.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you don't really come into this role unless, like, I believe that you care about people and you're empathetic. And so sometimes the downside is that you can burn out pretty quickly. So you've got to be quite careful in that, like, making sure that you have boundaries too. you know, and what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. It's very easy to say yes to absolutely everything because, you know, like you want to help people and, you know, like there can be a bit of a savior complex. So it's just making sure that, you know, like you're keeping that in check and you're not spreading yourself so thin that you can't do a great job in the, you know, in the position that you have. But yeah, like we're all mental health first aiders. And so that's one of the things that you know, we're quite like we're pretty determined that everyone needs to have that who's interested in doing this role, just because so much of the damage is what you can't see, you know, like, and I think that was the main issue coming into it, especially from the fight world, because, you know, it's pretty obvious if a stunt goes wrong and someone breaks their leg, you know, like we're all pretty clear that, you know, like there was physical trauma there. But one of the issues that, you know, that the intimacy world has had for so long is that the damage has been invisible, or at least publicly invisible for such a long time. And you know, it can happen, you know, days, weeks, months, years later, but it's still there.
No, definitely. And there's been obviously things in the last few years that have helped illustrate that to a much wider audience. And obviously people watching, I'm sure, can go, you know, research that if they want to. But then linking to that, I guess, is where does your role begin when it comes to action? Was an intimacy coordinator begin when someone maybe is holding hands, kissing, or all the way up to simulated sex? Or where does it sort of begin and end?
Yeah, for sure. So we typically deal with scenes of nudity and simulated sex, but it's not limited to that, because, you know, for example, if there is sort of you might determine like a grope, or, you know, like physical body contact, you know, with hands all over someone else's body, you know, like that's a very easy boundary to break. It's, you know, it can be triggering to some people. And also it's, you know, essentially it's about storytelling. Just as you would have a fight director for, you know, a piece of violence, from anything from, you know, like a slap to a full-blown mass battle, it's sort of similar with us as well. You know, we have specialized skills and techniques to help people tell stories safely. And so it's really sort of like, again, down to the actor, because, you know, like if an actor wants, you know, help and they want some techniques, like that's something that we can also offer. So I've been called in from anything from, and also not forgetting, you know, non-sexualized intimacy. You know, we're there to help create relationships, and whether that's, you know, from, you know, people who are sexually intimate to everything from, you know, brother, sister, parent, child, best friends. Like we can also work with that sort of intimacy as well.
It's great. It just shows it's a much broader canvas than we might first think, which I think is a wonderful thing. And it's that the engagement and that working with other people, again, that consensual relationship that can develop across the board.
Yeah.
You mentioned paperwork. Now, as a performer, I know about nudity riders. I've read a few. For those who don't know, would you mind explaining a bit about like what paperwork can be linked to sort of nude or sexual content?
Yeah, for sure. So nudity rider is sort of like an addendum that would be put in your contract about what you are comfortable showing and what you're comfortable doing in terms of simulated sex. And what we do is we work out with the performer, you know, what does that look like? And then we liaise with production to make sure that what is written down is what actually happens. And of course, just because you write something down doesn't mean that like you are going to be forced to do that on the day. You know, as we talk about consent, you know, consent is always, you know, reversible. Otherwise, it's not really consent anymore. And so we often deal with that sort of paperwork. We'll do risk assessments as well. You know, there's lots of different sort of types of paperwork that like surrounds this job. And part of it is because, you know, once you see things written down, it adds so much more clarity than if it's just sort of like, you know, a casual conversation, or, you know, even a conversation with multiple people. It's always nice to have it, you know, in black and white on the page so that everyone is clear about what's happening.
Definitely. Again, that communication, that clarity can really help. And and when it comes to, I think, filmmaking, that can save a lot of time, which hopefully can save money for everybody. So there's a nicer product at the end of it for everyone that comes to it. Now, we mentioned a bit about the actors, obviously, but it's not just the actors who are experiencing the intimacy on set. Do you do any work with the crew, the director, to help them with like any awkwardness they may feel or pressure?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, one of the things that we'll do is, we'll talk about language. We want to call things what they are. Like when we've got people like talking around the subject, again, it doesn't help with clarity there. So we make sure that we're specifically talking about, what we're doing here. Is it digital, is it simulated digital penetration? Is it simulated vaginal sex? Like what are we talking about? And let's get specific about it. The same, when we're talking about body parts, we want to make sure that we're talking about penises, vaginas, vulvas, and getting specific about it. And so, like, obviously, like, like there can be some humor around that, and and that often helps relax people. But one of my jobs is to make sure that we're aware that like we're at work, and so that when we are doing those scenes, they are treated with respect, so that the person who is partaking in those scenes doesn't feel like they're like the butt of the joke, or like they are any more vulnerable than they need to be in that moment. And so and it's also important, like when we're talking with performers, if they are very comfortable with their body, which is absolutely great, but they're refusing to put a robe on in between scenes, like that's something that needs to be addressed, because of course the crew are going to be exposed to that, and that can create all kinds of situations where like, hey, maybe they don't really want to be close to your naked body, maybe they've got to shuffle around you, it can open up all sorts of things that like don't need to happen if people would, people just put robes on. So again, like we can coordinate and liaise with that too.
That's great. I mean, it shows again, it's something so much bigger than just going on and going, oh, try this, or try that, or give an opinion, which is great. Now, a lot of people watching, maybe short filmmakers, low budget productions, and they are writers, directors. Now, they may be putting a script together that has intimacy in it in some way at different levels, but might not be able to necessarily afford someone like yourself, or have never done it, but they've never had an intimate scene before in a script. Are there any kind of steps they could take, or should they look at something in a different way?
Yeah, and I guess like obviously as we spoke about, when it's working with sort of lower budget films, I would pose the same thing that I would pose to them if they were considering like a mass battle. It's the same situation. If you cannot afford to bring a professional on to keep your actors safe, maybe pick something else or choose something else. There are so many different things that you can do which will still tell the story, that might not involve showing nudity or simulated sex. And especially in the world of COVID right now, we're having to think really creatively about how we do this. Even closing the door with people removing like, some top layer of clothing, we can still get the idea. And so again, it's whatever will tell the story, but again, keeping those actors safe if you know that you can't afford a professional to look after them.
No, that makes perfect sense. And for those who don't know, I do a bit of work with swords, and with the same thing when it comes to fight and stunt work. It's that, can you imply it in another way, particularly around things that put people in danger, or if you're working with people who have not experienced it before, it's very important to have different ways of approaching things. So we're coming towards the questions from the public, Lizzy, but there's a few more for me, I'm afraid, beforehand. So do keep those questions coming in, and thank you for Yo-Yo and Sally for sending those across. And don't forget to let me know where you're watching from, and so what your background is. Are you a filmmaker, an actor? Are you just here to find out more about what we're talking about? And the same if you're watching the recording. But Lizzy, it's obviously a very new role that you're in at the moment, and there's clearly a need for intimacy coordinators who are properly trained, properly educated. How can someone go about becoming an intimacy coordinator?
Yeah, for sure. So we offer like various training on our website. I will say that we are going to open up again pretty soon, but obviously we've had to close from COVID. So we're just hoping that we can get our numbers down to like the COVID numbers in the country down to a far safer level, because we'd be pretty poor intimacy coordinators if we couldn't keep the people that we were training safe. So we've been on hold for a little while now, but like I said, we're hoping to get ready soon. I think we've got like a list of courses that we have as prerequisites before becoming an intimacy coordinator, and the reason that we decided to do prerequisites before actually training to be an intimacy coordinator is that, you know, like, these are great courses for the industry to have in general. So, you know, it is not a bad thing for people to take a mental health first aid course. Like, it is not a bad thing for people to take conflict resolution. You know, like there are so many things and so many great courses out now, particularly that that are online now that never used to be. You know, like you can do Beck2's creative passport. Which is like a health and safety qualification, and that's now online. And I would really encourage people to sort of, you know, to get on there and do those things, because even though they're prerequisites for our course, they're also just, I really truly believe, like, good things for the industry in general, to make this industry a safer place. We've seen very publicly, as we discussed before, you know, how dangerous this industry could be. You know, like health and HR departments are pretty rare, let's put it that way, and yet they're not in sort of like nearly every other profession that you can walk into, but they are, you know, in our world. And so I think for just an increase in general knowledge on, you know, consent work is a great thing for everyone to be aware of. Mental health first aid, you know, like that's a great qualification for people to have who are working in an industry that demands incredibly long days, very tight-knit relationships, and, you know, large stress levels due to sort of all sorts of things like budgets and storylines and things like that. So we should all be protecting ourselves in that respect.
I definitely agree. I mean, we did some training the other day with Biffa about impartial bias. It was great, just that kind of, you know, the training. But yeah, and people looking to go training, Beck2, Screen Skills, obviously yourselves, we put your website in our chats as well. So, but I think anyone working, do go and look and see what's out there. There's a lot of free stuff at the moment as well, and free workshops to get started somewhere and, you know, begin the journey.
Yeah, we've got a workshop coming up on the 6th of December, which is about, you know, delivering boundaries with empathy. Because, you know, sometimes that's a really difficult thing to do, you know, like how do you tell someone your boundaries in an empathetic way? Like, and how do you do that with compassion? And how do you receive boundaries with compassion? You know, like, both of those things are, you know, they're easy to say, but quite difficult to do. And so we've got a little workshop on that on the 6th, and you can find that on Eventbrite.
Ooh, that sounds great. So one final question for me for now. Let's say I'm making a film and I do have a budget. How do I hire an intimacy coordinator? Is there a central website I go to? Do I just look online? Is there places I shouldn't look?
Yeah, so make sure that they like have some training, because obviously it's very easy for anyone right now to call themselves an intimacy coordinator, because it's not sort of like sanctioned by equity in any formal way. We're working with Beck2 to create like an intimacy coordinators branch, but we have intimacy coordinators on our website, Intimacy for Stage and Screen, who have all been through extensive training. A lot of people were there at the very beginning of this work, who've been in it, you know, for the last 5 years. You know, like, I've been doing it for, you know, since pretty early on. And so making sure that you've got people with experience, ask for their CVs, what shows have they done? You know, who have they worked with? Have they worked with professional actors? Have they worked with professional directors? You know, like, do they have, you know, some of the training courses that we've got listed? You know, are they a mental health first aider? All of that work. I would say, you know, like, do your homework.
It's good old-fashioned due diligence, which is the same for an actor looking to be cast in something, or you're hiring a DOP. It's very much the same. Like, just because it's a new role doesn't mean you shouldn't pay attention to all the same things.
it's very easy to just sort of go, okay, tick that box, but you know, like really have a look. What have they done? And have they done things that, you know, have they done the genre that your film is in? You know, like that's also really important, because then they'll have experience working in fantasy, or they'll have experience working in like historical dramas, or do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's also really important.
Well, you've actually segued nicely onto my first question from people, believe it or not.
Oh.
So
That's
the questions from me for now. So, Lizzy, are you ready for some questions from those watching?
For sure.
Okay, now let's get those organised. So, can you talk a little bit about your work on Bridgerton?
I can talk a very little bit about.
Give us the little bit you can talk about.
Right, because obviously it's not out yet, but it is coming out on Christmas Day. So you've got 8 hours that you don't have to talk to relatives on Christmas Day if you prefer not to. I would maybe suggest being careful who you watch it with. If you've got family members that you prefer maybe not to watch intimate scenes with, then maybe avoid watching Bridgerton with them. Maybe they can watch it in a different room. Yeah, it was a fantastic experience. The cast were absolutely amazing and incredible. I was truly lucky to be involved. I worked with some of the best directors and the best production crew that I really could have asked for. And quite honestly, like I love I absolutely love working in the Regency period. We had an incredible social etiquette historian with us called Hannah Grieg, and you can find her on Twitter. Like, do follow her. She posts some really great stuff. And it was just such a blast. We went to some amazing locations. And you know, like the costumes they're just out of this world. I mean, you can see them on the photos already, and there's been a little trailer that was released. And yeah, the costumes are absolutely amazing. The wigs are incredible. The makeup is awesome. It is just so wonderfully rich and full of escapism. And I think it's probably what the world is going to need coming into Christmas.
So that's Bridgerton on Netflix. Netflix this Christmas. And then linked to that, I suppose, if you are working on a period drama intimate scene, do you have to do any research into that period, or is it all given advance?
Oh, for sure. I mean, like any time that I'm working with a production, I will absolutely do like what I call my own research project. So I'm going to be looking in, okay, what undergarments are they wearing, if they're wearing any, you know, like they may well not be. For a lot of historical pieces, people didn't wear underwear, but you know, depending on what class they're coming from as well. So I think it's so important to do the homework about the piece that you've been given, because then you have, you know, far more options, whether that's choreographically or, you know, intention-wise. You can be of far more service if you've done your homework and you're considering, you know, the context for which you're working in.
No, that makes perfect sense. I think, you know, everyone should be able to understand that across departments as well. Okay, within your role, are you there to protect the actor from abuse or being taken advantage of because an actor wants to please and doesn't want to feel uncomfortable?
Yeah, so I think that there's probably two answers to that. My job is certainly advocacy. So that is speaking up on behalf of the actors. It's doing the homework in prep to ensure that they have control of their own body and any actions regarding their body. And it's certainly to ensure that I can put in place all the safety that is required for their scene. But I would also say that, you know, part of my role is as well is to encourage like personal actor advocacy. And I think that that's really important too. You know, it is tough because, you know, that there's a power dynamic between the actor and the director, you know, and the actor and producer. You know, there's a hire fire power dynamic. They can be hired and fired by these people. And I think that's one of my roles really is being that third party, you know, like in terms of the actor, like my role, I can't hire and fire them. So in that way, I'm sort of like a third party, like a safe space for them to tell me, how they're actually feeling in the moment. And again, it's really about how we can tell, how we can storytell in the safest way for everyone, and still create a vision that the director is pleased with.
No, makes sense. I think hopefully so. Okay, so this one is from Abby. I love your strong female power. That's what she said. 2 exclamation marks, by the way.
Oh, thank you, Abby.
And she just had a question as well, though. A question. So one show she loved this year was Normal People, which has been praised for its portrayal of intimacy. What do you think made the scene so moving and seem so real?
So I didn't work on that show, but I think that there is, I think what's been really interesting in that, up until now on screen, I think that we've seen a sort of like the Hollywood film world of intimacy. And we know that that's not real, because a lot of us experience intimacy in our everyday lives. And sometimes the sort of like the Hollywood-esque world of intimacy can feel a little bit removed, and it can feel a little bit sort of like aglow with it feels a little bit unrealistic. And so I think one of the really nice things that we are starting to see now is a more accurate portrayal of what sort of everyday intimate relationships look like. Like, like there are awkward moments, there are human moments, like there is a moment where someone might put on a condom, and that, for example, it might not happen the first time, or maybe it's a little bit tricky, or do you know what I mean? Like it's sort of getting into those nitty-gritty but very real moments that humans experience when they're intimate together. And I think that that's a really important like turning point that we're discovering at the moment as an industry, is that that's very appealing, particularly when you have like I'm going to go out on a limb here, when there are so many, there's so much access to things, like pornography and adult filmmaking at the moment. And it can give, quite a warped idea of what like human to human intimacy looks like. And I think that what people are actually craving is, authentic relationships, where it's, where maybe the intimacy isn't perfect the first time, or, one person doesn't reach orgasm, or, it's taken in turns, or do you know what I mean? Like the simultaneous orgasm, like it's, I don't think that we've really had a good investigation as an industry as to, like what the opposite might look like, and considering that seems to be, quite maybe potentially a more normal thing than people have given it credit for.
No, it's definitely. I think there's exciting times ahead with it all. There's a lot, but filmmakers as well and actors. There's a lot of potential to create new things.
Yeah.
So this is also from Abby. It's a really interesting one. Do you find it a different experience working with different age groups?
Yeah, I do actually. Sometimes I think with actors who are a little bit more seasoned, one thing that I do get from them is relief sometimes, and also a little bit of almost a little bit of like sadness that this wasn't around when they first started out. And I think that, I had an experience recently where, an actor came to me and said, like, I wish this role had existed when I was 18 and coming into the industry. Like I think she sort of said, like, I'm in mourning for my 18-year-old self when I look at what we're doing now, compared to what we were doing then. And and then you have the opposite of actors who are like, hey, I've done this for 20 years, I'm good to go. But it's really lovely working with people who, this is potentially their first intimacy scene, and they may have had nerves because, they've heard experiences of what other people have been through, and they're a little bit nervous about it. But then, they meet, me and the director, and, we have a really easy, relaxed rehearsal, and they leave feeling really good. And that's been fantastic too. I always like, it when this is someone's first scene of intimacy and they walk away from it, feeling great. And that's my hope is that that's the trajectory for the rest of their career with intimacy scenes, is that it was good at the start and it's only going to get better.
Oh, thank you. Do actors, technicians approach you directly during the filming process if there's a concern, or do they go through the producers or the heads of department?
Are we just specifically talking about actors?
No, actors, technicians, anybody. So if anybody on set has a potential concern, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly say that is absolutely my role. That's what I'm there to do, and I make that as clear as possible to the entire cast and crew at the beginning of the process. If they have concerns, they can come and talk to me at any point. And my role is not to shut out the director and to take the reins away and to step on their toes. That's not what my role is. But again, it might be something that I can just fix very quickly if the director is busy doing something else. It might be easy for me to just do a very quick fix. It might be anything from working out a different trick with a barrier, or working with modesty garments, or maybe they want to be maybe there's something around their changing room that they want fixed, or whatever it is. That's certainly what my role is there for.
No, that makes sense. I guess it's having somebody there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like you're just there to tick a box for the insurance or something?
I would say that's been my experience a couple of times, if I'm being very real. But and again, there are people, there are stunt coordinators who've turned up at some point and they've done something very, very minimal, and they feel like they're there to tick a box. Just being very real. But again, if I see something that is unsafe in any way, and I will and do speak up about it, and I am ignored, there is a point where I will walk away from a project, because you don't get to say that you've got an intimacy coordinator if you're not interested in any of the safety protocols that they're bringing. To me, that doesn't ring true. That's not authentic. That's just ticking a box. You can't have someone with that, with that title on set and not, listen or take any notice of what they're saying with regards to safety, because we do have a health and safety role.
No, that makes sense. I think it's great that you're there for everybody who has any concerns around that. So I've got time for a few more questions, if that's okay, Lizzy.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is an interesting one. So from an actor's perspective, obviously we understand that people have physical and chemical reactions to intimate scenes. But if one actor finds one person completely unattractive in a performance, are there ways of helping build up a relationship for the sake of the scene beforehand, or talk us a little bit about the process, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. A film is such an interesting one, because people can fly in that morning and yet they've got to pretend that they've had a relationship for 30 years. So it demands a lot of an actor. But there's something that we can do to create instant chemistry between performers. We do lots of I call it emotional mapping between two performers, to sort of find a connection Because again, like we are working with pretend. I think it's really important to distinguish between that like personal and professional body. Just because you don't find them personally attractive, like, hey, we're acting here. We've got to be able to find something. We've got to find something to work with, and then like lead with that. And that's going to be my role in that moment, is to work out, like with using emotional mapping, how we can get both actors to a place where it looks like there is a very authentic relationship between them.
That makes sense. I think it's factoring a bit of timing, isn't it, really, as well, from the production side of things, not just to rush in to these scenes in the same way with fights or stunts or the expensive thing which has the prop.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so much of this is choreography, and if you were going into a dance, you would allocate time for that rehearsal. If you were going into a fight, you would allocate time for that rehearsal. And I had two actors the other day adamantly tell a director that doing a simulated sex scene was like a stunt, and it's absolutely true. And in the same way that you would apply rehearsal time to that, you need to apply rehearsal time to this.
No, great. Okay, a question from a filmmaker now. They've got a short film which involves a female topless scene. I guess it's short, so I assume no budget. Are there any sort of safeguards they should put in place beforehand? Should they put something out in the casting call to say that? How could they communicate, I guess, that scene to a potential actress or actor?
Yeah, a lot of it is down to the audition process and being incredibly clear about it. But I would still say, if you are engaging in something that has nudity, you are going to want to work with a professional who can handle the legal side of that. Because what you have to be prepared for if you're going to go down that road is that if you aren't working with a professional, it's very easy for people not to feel safe, and for people not to feel safe in the moment, and for people to make complaints 3 months down the line. So I think just being very aware of what you're walking into. My question would be, is the topless scene absolutely necessary? And again, if the topless scene is absolutely necessary, then make sure that you've got a professional that can help you with that. Clarity in casting is absolutely key, and just being aware of how it's worded, just so that it's that there is some context around it. Context is absolutely key. It's different from a performer saying yes to something that is maybe like on a king size bed in candlelight, beautifully lit, versus topless walking down a fluorescently lit corridor in very harsh lighting. Context is everything.
Definitely. I think if actors themselves are concerned, equity have quite a lot of support that can be offered around, and for filmmakers to check out what they can and can't ask people to do in auditions, and all those conversations that can take place.
And again, we've got guidelines on our website. So we've got equities. We have an intimacy working group with Equity, and you can see like their guidelines for working with scenes of nudity and simulated sex, and working with an intimacy coordinator for them. And again, they're all on our website. And if there are any performers out there who are considering working with intimacy scenes, we've got some guidelines for performers as well, so that there are some more sort of like helpful hints and tips and information surrounding that.
That's great. And Yo-Yo has put the links to Lizzy's website in the comments here, so you can go back and find those links, find those guidelines, find out about the training that's happening. One final question, which I'm sure is on lots of people's mind, but they don't want to comment, and I've got one question with it. Prosthetics, or we haven't talked about physical barriers, I suppose, that are used in intimate scenes. I'm sure people have heard of socks and things like that have been used in the past, but what's the current standard in the industry?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, I think there's probably a lot of articles around there where like modesty garments in the past have either.
That was the word I was looking for. I just completely escaped. I was like, "That what they called?" Oh,
you're right. Where they've like either fallen off, or like been hurriedly made, or haven't been quite secured properly. And I would say that the world is absolutely changing on that. Things are getting better and better all the time. Modesty garments are improving all the time, and like barriers are improving, and prosthetics are improving all the time. And I've got real hope for this industry that like I imagine that in 10 years time this industry will look so different than it does now, and I hope it does. Like I really do. I hope that it is more equitable. I hope that we're telling very authentic stories of intimacy. I hope that it is far more diverse than it's been before. So I've got a lot of hope for the industry, and especially in 10 years' time. I don't want it to look the same.
No, that makes sense. I think that's a great place to leave it as well for this evening. So, Lizzy, thank you so much for your time, particularly as you had a busy day on set. It's been lovely to talk to you, and I think it's been really insightful as well, and people to find out. And thank you all for watching, wherever you are in the world, whether you're watching live or whether you're watching the recording. Do let us know. And we are also talking to Lizzy about possible workshops for people. So if you're interested in a intimacy workshop, please comment, let us know. We can help set those things up for people, whether it be in Cornwall or with the other Amplify partners, which would be amazing. So Lizzy, thank you so much once again. So do check out all Lizzy's work. And you can come back tomorrow at 6 p.m. where we will be announcing the winners of the Cornwall Film Festival Short Film Awards 2020.
Ooh.
I get to dress up, Lizzy, hopefully.
Oh.
We've got to find a suit to wear in a few hours. We'll see what happens.
Dig out that wardrobe.
I will. I haven't worn one in ages. Anyway, that's it from us for the evening. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care, and why not go watch a film at Amplify? All right, we'll see you all soon. So we turn our things off, Lizzy.